Hi, I'm Francey Hakes. Thanks for joining me again in the fight against child sexual exploitation. I have a very special guest today with me in our leadership series here at SafePath's Child Advocacy Center in Marietta, Georgia. Joining me is Sharon Girling, who is an officer of the British Empire. She was awarded that designation by the Queen of England for her work for over 30 years protecting children as a detective, and now in the private sector advising companies on how to protect children. Sharon, thank you so much for being here.
You're more than welcome, and it's lovely to be here.
Sharon and I are going to talk today and give you some ideas on the impact of child sexual abuse images, what we call child pornography here in the States, has on the victims of those child sexual abuse crimes. Sharon, you worked for more than 30 years protecting children, and in fact you innovated some databases and technological tools to try to identify the victims of child sexual abuse images. Let's talk first about terminology. Here in the States we call these images child pornography, but in the UK and other places you don't. Can you tell us a little bit about why and what terminology you use?
We use either indecent images of children or child sexual abuse images. And the reason we've changed our terminology is because we listened to what victims had to say. They felt that it wasn't pornography. Pornography indicates consenting adults, and they felt they're not consenting, they're actually victims of crime, and as such our government listened and our government changed the legislation, thus empowering victims to feel like their word is being heard.
So what I'm hearing from you saying is that you've done a lot of discussing these kind of cases with victims of these types of crimes.
Yes, I have. I still manage to keep in contact with many victims that we've dealt with over the years.
So for just a few minutes, let's talk a little bit about the impact of this kind of crime on these victims. We all are aware of some of the statistics surrounding child sexual abuse and its adverse effects on children's development, their relationships, depression later in life, etc. But when you're talking about children who've been abused and then videoed or filmed in some way and those images gone out across the internet, what is the impact of that particular part of the crime on these children?
The crime lives with the children forever. I deal with some victims who say, although they've gone into adulthood and have managed to go into relationships and have married and had children of their own, the crime never leaves them. Some victims have told me they wish to be a teacher, and yet they feel as if they can't go into teaching because they're concerned that parents, students themselves or colleagues may have seen those pictures of them being sexually abused. And yet when they walk down the street or go into a coffee shop and someone smiles and says hello, are they saying hello for the right reason? Or are they saying hello because they've actually seen the image of them being sexually abused?
It's remarkable. One of the things we've talked about here, in addition to changing our terminology potentially, is whether or not victims should be notified when they've been depicted in these kind of cases, because victims could be notified of these crimes for years, and even sometimes we know it's happening decades after their victimization is over. How do you think that impacts victims, knowing that it may be years and those images are still circulating?
I think it can have some effect for one person and it'll have a different effect for another victim. I don't think there is one fix all. I think for some people they like to know that the offenders are being held to account for them downloading that content and they're being brought to justice and that their voice is being heard in that manner. And for others, they want to have the ability to carry on with their lives. So I think that the system that you have here is probably accurate, whereas victims can opt in to know about it or opt out to avoid that knowledge.
And finally, let's talk briefly about resources. We know that there are, according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, millions of images circulating on the internet at any given time, at any given day, at any given month. And these children have not been identified, many of them. The National Center has identified about 5,200 children out of nearly 100 million images that they've examined in the last approximately 12 years. What do you think needs to be done to increase those numbers and find and rescue these children who are being abused?
I think governments need to take it seriously. In fact, in my own country, it is not a policing priority, and yet theft of mobile phones is. So I'd like governments to take the matter seriously. I've dealt with crimes as serious as murder, and I've found 2 or 3 pictures of murder scenes, of newspaper cuttings in the offender's house. And I've been applauded for that by senior officers who have been leading those kind of investigations. Yet if I find a computer that's got 40 or 50 or 100 or 300 or 500,000 indecent images of children on it, people don't want to know, they don't want to listen, because they're frightened about the amount of time it's going to take to investigate that case. Well, I've dealt with cases myself where we've, on one computer alone, had 1,236 different children who were being sexually abused. We don't know where they are. We have no knowledge of their whereabouts, and we have no capacity to rescue them. And that's shameful. That truly is shameful.
And one last question. Do you think that part of the reason that sufficient resources are not devoted to this topic, finding and rescuing child victims of child sexual abuse, is because, at least in part, it's very difficult, as you said, for people to look at this kind of crime. People don't want to accept that it exists. They don't know quite how to address the problem because it's a problem on so many different levels, socially, economically, culturally, that they just, instead of trying to do everything they can, they do less than they should.
I think the technology is the answer to this issue. And I think many countries have databases where they collect the images and deal with them within their own community. But actually there is a cry to have a national and yet an international database, a truly international database, where everybody who's investigating these crimes puts all of the information, and I'm not just talking about the images, I'm talking about the computer data that goes with that, and let professionals who know about analytics investigate those hard drives and let them try and locate where those children were created, where those images of those children being sexually abused were created from, and let's bring those people to account. Unless we put all of our resources in one bucket and we start to look at how we can resolve this issue, unfortunately, Francey, you and I will be sat here in 10 years' time having the exact same conversation and not feeling very good about ourselves for it.
It's a complicated issue. Unfortunately, there are maybe millions of children out there being abused, begging to be rescued in silence. Sharon, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all the work you've done to do your part on finding some of those children, rescuing them, and seeing that they give the treatment that they need, including treatment at places like this, the Child Advocacy Center called SafePath in Marietta, Georgia. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.